All right, my guest is Jonathon Thorpe, or Jonathon William Thorpe. It sounds a little more prestigious to throw in that middle name. Maybe I should do that. Jonathon is a United States federal government paralegal specialist. And we can't say what agency he works for. And there's a very good reason for that. John, why don't you explain why not?
So, as a federal employee, the main issue is we have to stay kind of neutral when it comes to everything related to the government. You may see on the news former employees or maybe some current employees, voice their opinion or voice their concerns with things, and it really should be, as a federal employee, no matter who the president is, anytime you're there just to do your job and whatever that is, and on top of that, I personally don't speak for the administration or for the government. So if I'm discussing a legal statute or a regulation, it's not. It's my personal opinion, my analysis. I'm not representing the government or the administration. I don't know what the White House counsel is going to do or what they're going to decide. So it's me as a citizen talking about my opinion, my analysis, and I happen to work for the government.
All right, well, that's pretty reasonable, especially in this day and age where the press is so often relying on anonymous sources. Mm-hmm. And then what really gets me is when they don't even, give a reason why they're anonymous.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's so I don't think we have to be too defensive in explaining this. And people will be able to judge for themselves how well informed you are by what you say. And we're going to talk about the extent to which the president has or doesn't have authority to order the construction of walls or fences without the approval of Congress. So this we got started on this with just a spontaneous Facebook discussion a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, whenever it was, and at that time you said that let me see, I think I actually have it written down here, that it's something to the effect of that it's not a very good way to proceed, meaning to declare a national emergency, but it is legally sound. So before we get into why it's legally sound, why don't you think it would be good for the president to declare a national emergency?
I think when it comes to good and bad if he does it, it's more the idea that we want to still stick to the system that our framers set up, the idea of when it comes to passing laws, that goes through Congress. And as someone who believes we should stick to that basic system, I would love and hope for a legislative fix to this issue. So I mean, that's kind of why I think it's not the best alternative, but if there's coming to a point where there's a stalemate in Congress and stalemate through legislation, but there is an emergency, in a sense that there's a problem happening at the border, other options should be looked at.
All right, well, one of the goals of this conversation, I think, is to strike a balance between explaining the legal considerations in a way that really pays attention to the statutes, but also doesn't get too much into the weeds, because it'll just be above people's heads, above my head. I'm not trying to suggest that my knowledge is so wonderful. But we have to get into it a little bit because it is, by definition, very much a legal issue. I think one of the main people have been throwing around various statutes online in the last few days. And I think there's one key distinction, and correct me if I'm wrong, John. One issue is the authority the president might have, and the other is getting the funds to do it. Can you edify us a little bit on what the difference is?
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes to military construction or any statute, when it comes to funding, you have your authorization to do a project or to do a study, and then the appropriations, the funding. And I thought of kind of a best way to explain it in terms of easy. If I ask my wife to buy a 70-inch TV, so I text her, I'm at Best Buy, I text her and say, "Wife, I want to buy a TV," and she texts back, "Yes, go buy it." That would be the authorization, her saying to go buy it. I go, I grab it, I go to the register, I give my debit card, it declines. I have no funds. Well, that's the appropriation. Yes, she gave me the authorization to get it, but I have no appropriations, no funding to back it up. If she would have said something like, oh, yes, you can buy it, but also let's move funds from this one account to another account and buy it, and I bought it, there was the authorization, her saying yes to get it, and the appropriation, the moving of funds to another account, and us purchasing it. So it's, when it comes to statutes, and especially construction, it's easy to say, hey, look, there's a law that says he can build 1,000,000 miles of wall or hundreds of bases. But if there's no counter to that, or a part of that where it's like, here's the money where it's coming from, here's Congress saying X appropriations, you can't build anything.
Okay, so I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but we have one of the people who's watching now, Kat Trabert, who is asking, how will he prove it's an emergency? And that's just one of the issues that Trump might face in court. And we can get into what the other arguments might be as well. But since Kat is asking that question, first of all, is that likely to be an issue that comes up in court if Trump goes ahead and declares a national emergency, or however he may do it?
So the thing with a legal challenge or a court challenge, we have an issue, and you see it a lot with a lot of executive orders right now, that someone's going to go to somewhere in Hawaii or California, something under the Ninth Circuit when it comes to appeals, and they're going to do that. And even if he has a legal challenge or a legal standing, for example, we had the travel ban. There's legal standing for that. He was allowed to under 8 U.S.C. 1182F. That gave him, as the president, authority to suspend entry of any aliens that are deemed detrimental to the interests of the U.S. They still brought a legal challenge. It still went through the process. It went to Ninth Circuit, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and they said, yeah, the president has the authority. So saying all that kind of as a preface of, there's still a chance that someone can come up and say, hey, we don't, believe there's a national emergency. And that also kind of goes back to the statute, which is regarding giving authority to declare the president authority to declare a national emergency. It's 5 U.S.C. 1621. It doesn't have a statement or a sentence that says the president has to define one. It just pretty much is his discretion, what he feels, and what, if he uses the national security apparatus or Department of Homeland Security, their belief in what is national emergency. And I could note just recently, the 29th of January, they had the World Threat Assessment from the U.S. Intel community, and specifically on pages 40 and 41, they actually listed drug trafficking and illegal immigration as one of the top security threats facing the U.S. in the Western Hemisphere. So, more than likely, if a national emergency is declared under 1621, they'll have accompanying documentations, probably statements from Department of Homeland Security, maybe some reports, but at least with, when it comes to legally, there's no real spot in the law that says he has to specifically lay out a, lengthy definition of what he thinks a national emergency is. It just says he can declare a national emergency. Right.
Well, the Congressional Research Service, and a lot of people don't know who they are, and I think that's a shame, because the Congressional Research Service is relied on a lot by members of Congress. They may or may not be correct every time, but they have a pretty good reputation for being nonpartisan. And it's really just the intent is to explore different issues, come up with interpretations and possible interpretations when an issue has come up. And they recently published an analysis about the very issue we're discussing now, and I'm linking to it in the thread here. And in their analysis, they said, well, it's not clear whether or not it can be litigated, whether or not it even matters that it's an actual emergency. In other words, a court could rule that there's nothing to be argued. It's beyond judicial review. It's an emergency simply because the president says it's an emergency. But since that has never been litigated before, it's what they call a case of first impression. It is possible that a court might consider an argument about whether or not it is an emergency. Is that a pretty fair assessment?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I said when it comes to any challenge and that has an ability to get it challenged, and I still kind of myself, my opinion, holding this, looking for me, looking at this as the travel ban being that there were people that were harmed by it or had standing, but the Supreme Court, said that the president can do that because the law clearly states, he has the authority to do so. And it could still face a legal challenge on just the emergency alone, but I think that that would be a very interesting challenge.
Right. So, and other challenges, according to the Congressional Research Service analysis, have to do with the way certain terms are defined, like, is this really a military project? Is it really necessary? And so forth and so on. I don't want to go into it too deeply, but maybe we should just briefly go through these different statutes and, just in terms of what the essence of it is. 2808 requires the use of armed forces. So, the question is the project actually necessary to be supported by the use of armed forces? Do you have anything to say about that particular statute?
Yes. So I looked at that statute, and the problem I had with that, and I kind of, thought about it. I feel it's dealing with military construction to military construction. What I mean is, it's dealing with pulling funds from military construction to do a military construction type project. I don't believe the wall falls under military construction. So I really kind of, felt that the Congressional Research Center spent an awful lot on that one statute. When I again, my personal opinion is I don't think the wall itself would fall under military construction. And it had an issue with just that what is the legal definition of military construction? And that one, falls under, I'm looking at the statute now. It's military installation, military bases, and even with that, you couldn't quantify the wall or qualify the wall as a military base, under that statute.
Right. And what about the money? There's a certain amount of money that could be reallocated. Can you give us some sense of how much it is?
So if looking at the statutes, one they mentioned besides 2808 was 2803, which is emergency construction, again using MILCON, and that one had a set threshold of $50 million max. And I know in the Congressional Research Center and some other articles, they said there's a lot of money in MILCON that's not obligated. But looking at numbers, I believe that there wouldn't be, if they're asking for 5.7 billion now, originally it was like 20 some billion. I don't think there'd be enough to, pull aside from one appropriation to another for, enough of the wall, per se.
So how is Trump going to get to where he wants to get to? And, well, let's just have you address that question first.
Okay, so one of the statutes that the Congressional Research Center brought up in a very short paragraph is 33 U.S.C. 2293, and that's a reprogramming of civil works funds for actually civil works, MILCON, civil defense projects under a national emergency. And they brought it up, and it's really kind of, it says it gives the Secretary of the Department of the Army, Department of Defense, the ability to go through and look at projects that are civil works funded that are not, and deem them not essential if they're not, and move those appropriations over to construct or assist in the construction of operation and maintenance of and repair of authorized civil works, military construction, civil defense projects. I feel that would be the best avenue, being that one, it's not MILCON or military construction and military construction, and it allows more of a discretion by the Secretary of Defense to look at each individual civil works project, each pot of money, and say, is this for national defense? No, okay, let's see if we can move it.
Okay, and the current there's not a Secretary of Defense right now. There's an acting Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan, and I'm not sure how significant it is with respect to the notion of the Department of Defense being somewhat independent of the president or reaching a conclusion that might differ from his. Do you have any thoughts about whether or not the DOD will do exactly what Trump wants, or if they might disagree with him, or how that might play out?
With DOD is the first comment about having an acting. Even if you have an acting secretary of anything, especially in Department of Defense, as them acting, there's protocols and regulations that they are now the Secretary of Defense. That's they could be acting for a week, 2 days, 5 months. They are now Secretary of Defense. they make decisions, they sign documents, sign reports. When it comes to what the president says, under the military structure for DoD, he is still the commander in chief. So they can offer advice. They can say, you know what, I don't think we should do this. Maybe you're ordering us to move troops here. Here's our advice. But it's still up to them to follow through with those orders as the commander in chief orders.
All right. So let's say the president makes his move and he faces litigation. Is that likely to stall things for a short period of time or a long period of time? Or is it more likely that the Department of Defense will just take action and the struggle will be on the part of the people who want to slow him down?
So the thing is, and I thought long and hard about this, specifically with Section 2293. I could not, in my head and looking at research, find who would have standing to challenge just that statute. Taking aside if they're going to challenge that is a national emergency. Let's say they don't challenge that, and they're just challenging the statute of moving funds. I could not find someone, a group, that would have standing or feel that they be harmed by just moving funds from one pot of money to another pot of money in the Department of Defense. It's not like this section, 2293, is saying move funds and then start building. All it is just saying is go through, look at what, take money from one pot, from one account, move it to another. And then from there...
Let me just interrupt because I want to make people aware that the Congressional Research Service analysis is not totally in line with your point here, because they agree, well, Congress doesn't have standing, but state and local governments might, advocacy organizations might, and also property owners might have standing.
So, when it comes to standing, let's say property owners, I kind of took that as legal challenges after the wall. Let's say, if we're talking about legal challenges, we're property owners. I think that would come more legal challenges after these statutes are done, national emergency, and now it's time to build. And yes, I definitely think there would be, I wouldn't say a ton, but I mean a good amount of legal challenges. Let's say first land acquisition. That's a big one. That's a when it comes to governments wanting land, there's 2 or 3 routes. Pretty much the government either goes to the landowner and says, here is the property we want. We'll give you fair market value for it. If they say no, then it goes to condemnations. Once it goes to that, it takes 30 days, and then it's the government possesses it.
So there's a comment on the screen now. Native Americans in the region are tribal people, and their property is where he wants to build that wall. Any thoughts about that?
I off the top of my head, I would have to look into more, but I know there's been construction where near and possibly on tribal lands, old construction during the it was the 2006 Secure Fence Act, and I believe there was workarounds when it came to agreements with the tribal lands. Again, I can't 100% tell you where it happened, but I know during some construction there was agreements with tribal lands with that. And the thing with tribal lands is tribal lands are not taking up 50 or just 80% of where the wall would be built. More than likely, you could build up into that land, stop, and just have heavier security around that, and then start again on the other side if that's where it would be.
Right. Yeah, location, I think, is a relevant issue in more than one way, because some of these statutes refer specifically to drug smuggling. And, so people might argue, well, is this really a drug smuggling area or is it not? Is this particular area vulnerable or close to military installations, or is it not?
And that's true. I think with again, the one statute I go off of the 2293, pretty much the definition for that one is not even, I know drug smuggling was, if I could remember, 10 USC 284. That one kind of really had issues, but related to just drug smuggling and drug enforcement. But with 2293, that one is really just up to the idea that is it essential to national defense. And you could argue that this swash of land, this sector is essential. Maybe the sector next to it is not because we have mountain terrains or a lake or a river, but this sector is essential for national defense. And I think that's why I think 2293 has the strongest case to it is it's more open to the idea that if this part needs to be defended due to national defense, that's your definition.
But you're correct, by the way, on the statute. I just checked my notes. And I also want to just make people aware that all the statutes that seem to be possibly pertinent, I've linked to in this thread. So people, it's very hard to digest all this as soon as you just hear it for the first time. But if people want to check and think about it later. So, Joe, what do you think is going to happen? Let's apart from all the legalese and so forth, let's pretend we're at a cocktail party and we're just regular people talking. What do you envision? How do you envision it playing out?
So I've followed the situation for a while now, and I think Congress and the White House are at a true stalemate. Congress and Democrats have already said, no matter what, there will be no wall funding, nothing. White House has said, okay, we've tried. Here's what we're giving you this for the wall. We're giving you this for the wall, and it's always been there's no wall. The White House, the administration ended the shutdown. They allowed for this 3-week period to, per Miss Pelosi, Representative Pelosi, she said we open the government, let's negotiate. That's done. We have 3 weeks. February 15th is the deadline, so right day after Valentine's Day. I really feel I haven't heard anything on either camp where I feel there's a budge. Normally I could hear and you get kind of a feeling. I do not feel an agreement's going to come out of this on the 15th. And I do feel that a declaration of national emergency is going to be declared either on the 15th or possibly at the State of the Union.
Well, which branches of the government are going to be involved if there's construction of walls or fences?
So it's mainly going to be Department of how it works is Department of Defense. Under them has the Army, and under that have a branch called the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they're the largest contracting agency when it comes to the government. So what will happen is Department of Homeland Security or CBP will go to them and say, okay, we have, let's say the declaration goes through, they move funds. What will happen is CBP and DHS will go, okay, we need walls, fence, wences, however you want to explain it. Here's what we need them. Here's how much it costs, and here's the design. And that's the key. Designs have already been created. They're already in the file, you can say. And then once it happens, Corps of Engineers will then issue contracts, and that goes through a contracting process of issuing a solicitation. Contractors, private sector will bid. Once the contract is awarded, starts construction in a let's say 15 to 20 days, and then that starts.
Right.
If there's no legal challenges on land acquisition or environmental, that's no one challenges. That's what happened.
Right. So I know that the humans are complicated creatures, and not everybody has the exact same motivation and so forth. But can you give us any idea about what people are rooting for or against? Like, one thing that occurs to me is that people in certain positions just want some action. They want to do something. So I'm wondering how much that is a factor versus whether or not they're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, and and they have their opinions about immigration policy. Is there any? Can you give us any inside perspective on what's going on among government workers as far as what they're rooting for or against?
I mean, I really feel, and without saying too much, I feel it's really dependent on where they live and work. It's just like if you're working in the private sector, and I think federal employees who work maybe in Mississippi or Missouri or Texas or other red, quote unquote, red states may have a different opinion than the ones working in California and Los Angeles and San Francisco. So but I also feel that doesn't affect their work. personally, I don't know of any federal employee, either in my agency or in others, where they're not going to do their job that they are given because they dislike a president, any president. Pretty much, if their job is to review a permit on something, they're going to review the permit. They're not going to say, well, this permit's for something that I don't like, I'm going to not review it. They're going to do their job. And that's, I know the joke when it comes to federal employees is, well, they just, may not do their job right. A lot of them, and a lot of the ones I work with are great employees, great people. And no matter what, they may have a issue with the president, they're going to do their job and do it right.
Well, yeah, I mean, the other thing I was saying is that, I'm thinking of cops and people in the armed forces often are the kind of people they want some action,
Yeah.
Is there any kind of feeling like that you detect?
Here's the hard part is and I use jokes. Everyone hears the joke that government bureaucracy. To get a meeting, you have to have a meeting to discuss the pre-meeting to discuss the pre-meeting. That's just part of it. I think there's people that, and I go back to just doing their job. There's no urgency to go above and beyond in the sense that they're going to do their job, and when it comes to, let's say, a contract, there's a time limit, there's a procedure, they're going to do that. Unless ordered, by let's say the head of that agency or the head of that division of the agency to push forward, they're going to just do their job as if, it's any other project they're looking at or file they're reviewing.
Right. So I know that you don't want to reveal what agency you work for, but can you tell us a little bit about what your expertise is, what your responsibilities are, and how closely it relates to what we're talking about?
So, as a paralegal, my main focus is contract litigation, and so I deal with a lot of government contracts, government review of contracts, government projects. So I understand when it comes to, and also acquisitions, when it comes to appropriations and authorizations, I know that fairly well. I also know the construction field when it comes to the government.
And you're a paralegal specialist, and I don't mean this with any mockery or sarcasm or anything, but does the word specialist have significance as opposed to just being a paralegal?
No, it's in certain branches of the government, it's just called a paralegal. Sometimes it's called paralegal specialist. Sometimes it's called lead legal specialist. It's just in the branch. Some branches, they just call it paralegal specialist, the same as a paralegal.
Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else that you think we should mention before we sign off?
If I think we covered, I guess what I wanted to cover when it came to the statute, at least. I do know one thing I did want to bring up when it came to legal challenges, and I know a big one that's more than likely come up is an environmental challenge. I could see that one in kind of in the works. If this goes through, and it's let's say they start construction and there's an environmental challenge, I can say that there is case precedent that allows the government to circumvent both the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act to build infrastructure like the barrier and the wall. That's just something I remembered I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, now, and that would be only relevant in certain areas, or are you saying that would be relevant for the whole border?
So it really depends on, it's supposed to be certain areas, but you could, there could be challenges saying there is this one species that somehow migrates this one direction and it could be interfered with the walls built. It's not there, but it could at this one time, and that could be a challenge. But like I said, there was a case and it was already, decided that the government can bypass those or waive those acts to build something like the wall.
Right. So what I detect from you, and I want to laud you for this and thank you for this, is that you're trying your best to be a neutral analyst instead of pushing an agenda. And I think that's kind of what the Congressional Research Service also does. And that's very refreshing because even these legal experts, I think they very often masquerade as neutral analysts, as if their commitment is to the public and to edify the public, when in reality they're pushing, one view or another, as if they were representing a client, instead of representing the public. Do you have any particular favorites, or the opposite, anybody who you think is just terrible among the pontificators on cable news who are lawyers and professors?
The thing is, in all honesty, this sounds, I don't trust anyone. I mean, when it comes to what's on cable news, I will verify myself. So when I saw a lot of these discussions and rumblings of the national emergency, and here's some statutes, I take it as no offense to anyone, I already count them as it's not true until I'm going to read and verify it myself. So it's one of those things where I may watch someone on cable news, either CNN or MSNBC or Fox, but I take it as, they say something, I'm going to go, okay, they said it. I want to verify that what they're saying is true.
Yeah, well, you ducked the question, though. Is there anybody you think who's better or worse than the others? I'll throw a name or two. How about Alan Dershowitz?
I think I like him. I have no problems again, with him. I think that's I've heard some some of his discussions. I'm okay with him.
Seth Abramson. Did you ever watch his endless Twitter rants?
Oh yeah, him. No, I'm just saying he seems nice, but he seems nice.
He seems like a lunatic, if you ask me. How about Lawrence Tribe? Ever read
I
his
have.
musings?
I have. I will also say he seems nice.
You don't want to criticize anybody.
I try to, because I try not to. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I've read both of their Twitter feeds when it comes to their articles. I have some disagreements with them. I think some people may have lost a sense of, when it comes to the law, because they may have issues with a certain person in the office, and I think that's a problem. I think if you may say one thing 7-8 years ago, and now all of a sudden you are saying something completely different, I don't think it's a problem with the outside. It's a problem with that person.
You know who I think is very good is Jonathon Thorpe.
I like him. I mean, I think he's a good person too, and I like him.
Yeah, I've seen him criticize Trump, and I've seen him praise Trump. I don't get the feeling that his analysis is driven by rooting for or against anybody.
No, and I think it. If I like people who will be equal and just sit there and look at the facts and give their honest opinion without if someone has opinion of a person, if they stated it before and say, hey, look, I don't like this, or I like this, but separate that. My issue is with this law or with this action. Here's my analysis. I'm okay with it. And I think you can see when someone gives an honest analysis or an opinion that's not colored by a personal bias.
Andrew McCarthy.
I only read a few of his things. I apologize. I think I've seen him a few times on Twitter, but not a lot. I wouldn't comment on everything he's done.
All right. I'm not going to get you to criticize anybody. That's a disappointment, and I'm going to have to cope.
I am sorry.
No, you were great. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts, and maybe we'll do it again.
Anytime. I'm always available.
All right. Jonathon William Thorpe, 3 names. And this is Jeff Norman, only 2. Thanks to everybody for joining us, and please avail yourself of the links that I painstakingly posted so that you could follow up and really get a better understanding of all this. Take care, everybody. Toodles.